So today I'm going to share the word of the Lord today. And it's entitled, See the Way God Sees. Okay, see the way God sees. Thinking, well, sounds intriguing. Well, so if you want to go and fulfill God's plan for your life and become all that he wants you to be, you may have to see, or I shouldn't say you will have to see things the way God does, all right? That is easier said than done. So, but, some may think, well, that's impossible. God is God. I can't see like God sees because that's impossible because I'm not God. Well, you may think that God is like this distant God, the grand old timekeeper in the sky who, will occasionally just send a lightning bolt down just to strike you if he's angry with you or something. And, if he feels ornery, he's just gonna, but of course that couldn't be farther from the truth. And most of you probably know that. I'm being a little bit humorous here. But some people, they think, well, maybe God just sees everything like I see it. He evaluates and judges everything like I do. It's I'm seeing what he's seeing. So while it's true, okay, that our desires and our feelings are important to him, and God does value how we view things. Don't get me wrong by that. The things that he desires and sees as beautiful and glorious are not usually what others think are so. All right. So basically today I have some good news for you and I have some bad news. All right. The bad news is that we all have to have our vision adjusted. All right. And our perception of greatness in the kingdom of God altered to fit into God's vision. And the enemy will continually try to alter our perception of what we are to value. So it is a war that we are going to continually have to fight. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it and say that, yep, today you're just going to never have a challenge with the way you perceive things in this world. It's not the case, but here's the good news, all right? To see what God sees is really not hard. It's really not. It's not that complicated. You don't have to go for 4 years of seminary to get it. You don't have to... Hallelujah, yes. You don't have to have a degree. Those are wonderful, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things. They can give you more wisdom, but you don't even have to have known God for a very long time. It's very simple, and I want to talk to you about that today, all right? Let's begin with a story in the Old Testament. It's always good to begin with a story. 2 Samuel 16. Let's start in chapter 16, and we're going to read verse 1. It should be on the screen that we can all follow. And then we'll jump to verse 4 just to kind of concise this a little bit. It said in 2 Samuel 16, Now the Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. And let's continue reading, and I think in verse 4. So Samuel did what the Lord said. It's always a good idea to do that. And went to Bethlehem, all right? And the elders of the town trembled at his coming. Now you think, why are they trembling? Because this is a very important man, Samuel was, all right? Pretty much, other than King Saul, this is one of the most famous men in the country because he was the prophet of God at the time. All right. So the town kind of trembled, like, what is this guy doing here? Woo, what is, what is this? What is his purpose here? Are we in trouble? So they said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons. Because remember, God had told him to go see this man named Jesse and his sons, and he invited them to the sacrifice. So it was when they came that this is referring to Samuel the prophet, Samuel looked at Eliab. Now Eliab is the oldest of all Jesse's sons, all right? And so Samuel looks at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature. Must have been a pretty good-looking guy. Because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Jesse called Abinadab, that was the next in line here, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, got the next brother. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Thus Jesse made all 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. So Samuel's a little confused here. He's like, obviously first he was a little thrown off because, he sensed, Eliab, this has got to be the guy. I get goosebumps looking at him. It's got to be the chosen one. And God's like, no, I've refused him. Yikes. So Samuel's probably a little bit thrown here. He's going, God's telling me that none of these boys in front of me are the chosen anointed of God to be king. So and Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? He's going like, I thought we're supposed to have an anointed king here. I don't see him. And so Jesse said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. So he sent and brought him in. Now this is referring to David now, David's now here. Now he was ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So you would think, all right, that the prophet Samuel would have been able to recognize immediately that God had not chosen any of the other brothers. This is a prophet of the Lord here. When Samuel first saw Eliab, he was immediately impressed. He was sure that this was God's man for the hour. This has got to be God's direction because it just looks like it. It's just like, whoa, he's got the presence, he's got the aura, he's got the stature, he's got the looks, he's got the physique. Maybe you just kind of had the self-confidence, whatever. He's going, oh, that's got to be it. Totally. Like, let's just anoint him now. And God's like, no, Samuel. I'm looking at something more than everything else that you're sensing. I'm looking at his heart. And his heart is not right. But Samuel wasn't even able to recognize that. So Eliab was refused. Yet David, now get this, David had not even been allowed or invited by his father to come see this famous prophet. Like I said, this was one of the most famous men in the country, and David wasn't even invited to the dinner. But think of that. Here's like one of the most famous people in the country, and David's dad is like, well, okay, we got to have somebody watch the sheep. Who is the least crucial person in my family that I can have do this while we all go see the important guy? David, you're assigned to go watch the sheep while all of us go meet the important man. Bless David's heart. He's probably like, okay, Dad. I don't know. I think he was probably about, I think scholars think he was about 16. Or whatever. He was a teenager. All right. So the dad's like, well, okay, all my sons, the most important one is not David. So just let him go. It'd be like, okay, it'd be like say you're the youngest in your family or whatever, you're someone in your family, and you hear that, oh, Billy Graham is coming to your house for dinner, all right? And then your dad says to you, can you go out and mow the lawn while we're having dinner? You'd probably be like, Dad, I want to be there. But, so that's a little degrading for David. My point being that it's a little degrading, a little demoralizing. But God saw in David what not even his own father saw in him. He saw David's heart. Yeah. Now listen to this in Romans 2:28-29. This is Paul speaking. Now he's speaking to the Romans. But he said, for he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God. Now let's look at this together in 1 Corinthians 1:26 through 30. It says, "For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence." This is more radical than you realize, all right? This is more, I mean, if you would see that in the life of David. There was this giant named Goliath. Most of you know it, the giant Goliath. And no one in the entire army decided to face him. And so God said, because God knew that this giant had to be defeated because he was wreaking havoc on the nation of Israel, and all the Philistines were. And this was like their leader here, their strong man, literally. And so God said, who can I choose to beat this guy? I'm going to choose somebody who can't really do it in the natural. I'm going to choose something that looks ridiculous. I mean, literally, and even not just ridiculous as far as the person. When David was going to go out, Saul was like, "Well, at least take my armor." And David's like, "No, doesn't work for me. It's going to take a stone and a slingshot." I mean, this was like a kid's toy. This was a kid's toy that, and even the Philistine, when David came to Goliath like mocked him. He's like, "What are you doing with your little slingshot? Like, I'm going to destroy you. And you're coming to me with a little your Christmas gift, your little BB gun, And David's like, I love what David said, because this shows what was in David's heart. He had confidence in God because he's made these powerful faith confessions. If you read that story, he goes, "Look, Goliath, you come to me with a little, you come to me with a sword and a spear. I come to you not just with my little stuff. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." You know what that is? He was talking about, some of you might not know what the Lord of hosts is. He was talking about the Lord of angel armies. That's the hosts he was referring to. He says, "I'm not alone here." He goes, "There's a lot of people with me. There's a lot of hosts with me because I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." And he goes, "This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands." And it gets a little graphic. He says, "I'm going to cut off your head." But that's what he had to do to slay this giant, all right? Now get this. Even the great Apostle Paul himself, all right, dealt with the outward critical judgments of men, all right? Not just those of unbelievers. I mean, you could think, well, yeah, that Goliath, he was like, he didn't even believe in God. He was a heathen person. Of course he would criticize. But you wouldn't think that believers would be critical or judge incorrectly. But apparently they do, because in the book of 2 Corinthians, we see that those in the Corinthian church were actually critical of Paul's ability in leadership. You go, critical of Paul? Yes, they were. In 2 Corinthians 10, verse 7 through 18, this is what this says. And he's writing to the Corinthian church. It says, "Do you look at things according to the outward appearance? If anyone is convinced in himself that he is Christ, let him again consider this in himself, that just as he is Christ, even so we are Christ's. For even if I should boast somewhat more about our authority, which the Lord gave us for edification and not for your destruction, I shall not be ashamed, lest I seem to terrify you by letters." Now this is verse 10. "For his letters," they say, "are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible." Now, I want that to sink in a little bit, because you might get a little wordy here, but these believers were literally saying of Paul, I don't really like listening to him preach. He's just not very moving. He doesn't speak very powerfully. And, he writes really well. Like I enjoy reading his literature. I enjoy reading his books, but he just doesn't really cut it as a public speaker. I mean, that's literally what they were saying. They said his speech is contemptible. I don't say that of a lot of things. Unless I, maybe eat something that tastes really bad, I might say, ooh, that's contemptible. I mean, they were saying like, Paul, your speech is contemptible. Like, yikes. So maybe they just thought Paul's personality in person was kind of more quiet and meek or something. And maybe he didn't speak with great charisma. We don't really know exactly what he was like in person, but that's kind of what they were saying, that he doesn't have a lot of oomph. I don't really feel anything when he talks. I mean, he says, well, he writes really well, but Paul, just stick to writing. Don't really do the speaking thing. But of course, God had called him to share the word of God. All right. So now Paul, the gracious man he was, he didn't get upset at their criticism, but he uses this to teach them something very important. All right. In verse 11, this is what he says. He's continuing here. He said, let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters, when we are absent, such we will also be in deed when we are present. He's saying, look, the same things I'm writing, I'm sharing with you in person. It says, for we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves. This is so funny. It says, we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. This is actually kind of, you can laugh. I think it's funny. It says, we, however, will not boast beyond measure, but within the limits of the sphere which God appointed us, a sphere which especially includes you. For we are not overextending ourselves as though our authority did not extend to you, for it was to you that we came with the gospel of Christ, not boasting of things beyond measure, that is, in other men's labors, but having hope that as your faith is increased, we shall be greatly enlarged by you in our sphere to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's sphere of accomplishment, but he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. And let's look at verse 18, for it's like almost like Paul's like, all right, this is the kicker verse right here. For not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. Right? So Paul's saying, look, okay, it's really not about what you think about me. I'm just doing whatever God says to do. And that's who I'm trying to please. All right? So he's telling them through this all, stop looking and judging and comparing all this stuff among yourselves. Remember, he's going, look, you're all like comparing yourselves among yourselves, and you're like, oh, so-and-so is doing really well, and so-and-so is not doing really good, and I'm doing really well today, and I'm not doing really well today. He's like, just stop comparing. It's the great comparativitis, I think I've heard. It's like a disease, comparativitis. Like, let's just stop the comparing. Now we all do this though. I'm not trying to like bring down people here. We all do this. I'm guilty of it myself. Some people don't call it, judging. They maybe call it, oh, well, that was my first impression. My first impression of the situation, or I just sensed this about such and such, Well, whatever you want to label it, you just made a judgment in your own mental assertion, right? You just made a judgment in your own mind. Now, am I saying that you're never going to have thoughts and, impressions? Of course not. But what I'm challenging you about is what you do with those thoughts and how you can retrain your brain to actually evaluate things through God's vision. All right? Because in 1 Corinthians 2, this is all Paul here writing to the Corinthians. They had to have a lot of help, like me. Hallelujah. All right? It says, and I, brethren, when I came to you, did not come with excellence of speech. There you go. Or of wisdom declaring to you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness, in fear and in much trembling. And my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and power, that your faith should not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. However, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, there you go, nor of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery. I love that. The hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this age knew, for had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Now remember, I'm going to stop here because what it means by hidden wisdom, it's not that God is like not wanting people to know it, all right? It's hidden because we don't see it correctly. We don't see it. It's hidden because we have to see something differently here, all right? Now, verse 9, but as it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. And some people read that and be like, oh, see, we can never know. We can just never know what's in God's heart. We'll never know. It's just too grand for us. But listen, it says, but God has revealed them to us through how? His Spirit. All right? For the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. For what man knows the things of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might know the things that have been freely given to us by God. This is good news. You can know what's in the mind of God by the Spirit, who's going to help you and reveal it to you. Verse 13, these things we also speak not in words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Spirit teaches. Not in words or not comparing spiritual things with spiritual. Now get this, but the natural man, all right, the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. All right? Now, what Paul says to us through this is that your mind that isn't renewed to God's word is never going to accept things the way God sees it. It won't agree with them. It won't understand them. It will actually reject them. All right? God's ways often will not make sense to your first impression thinking. In fact, sometimes God's ways can even be offensive because we don't really understand them. It's a little bit like, it's kind of like Samuel. I mean, when Samuel was like, oh, Lord, Eliab, he's your guy. And God's like, no, he's not my guy. And Samuel's like, what? That doesn't make sense. You're going to choose a little 16-year-old kid to lead your country? But God knew all the process that would take place to get David to that place to be the leader. But yet Samuel couldn't see that, and he didn't know it. But thankfully, he heeded to the Spirit of God and said, I'm going to listen to the Spirit right now. And that's how he was able to discern that. So you may think, well, are we without hope? Are we always going to be in this state of confusion, never being able to get our mind in alignment with God? Thankfully, no. There is a process. That's why in the time that remains here today, I want to give you 3 ways. I'm just going to make it as practical as possible. 3 ways to see the way that God sees. All right? First way is to look and study the life of Jesus. Begin to retrain. Might say that a couple times, but it's essentially what it is. You're retraining your brain to the new normal. Find out what's important to Jesus. Find out what wasn't valuable. Find out what he emphasized and what he didn't. It's crucial to understand that. In John 14:9, Jesus actually said that if you've seen him, you've seen the Father. So to see like God sees, just look at the life of Jesus. Now, this does take time. I know that. You're not going to just be like, I read my Bible one day and I got the vision. You may have the vision for that one little thing you read, but there's a lot more, So this is a process. Just like David had to grow and mature, we have to too. It's very similar to learning a new language. It takes time. I myself, some of you, probably very few of you know, but for the past 4 months, I've been studying Italian. And I've been learning because I've wanted to learn a new language, and I have a couple of reasons why I chose that one, but I chose that one. And for 4 months, I've been not like intensely, but I've been a casual, but dedicated learner of Italian. But it's been incredibly challenging. And I have a new respect for people who know multiple languages fluently. And it's also given me a lot more understanding and, empathy for people who don't know English very well. And because I see and I feel when I'm listening to Italian and I'm struggling to interpret and respond, I can then now sympathize with people who feel that way in English. And it makes me much more understanding of them. Now, one thing I've noticed in learning Italian is pretty much every word, and I have a point in sharing this, pretty much every word ends in a vowel in Italian. Whereas in English, maybe only half or less than that end in a vowel. For example, the simple phrase in English, God is love, all right? In Italian is Dio e amore, okay? So you see a lot of vowels there, Dio e amore. It's very, very vowel-y at the ends. So, and literally every word in that phrase either a vowel or ends in a vowel. So speaking in Italian, it kind of almost doesn't feel right in my mouth because I'm so used to speaking English, where we have lots of just, there's no vowels at the end of, or very few at the end of our words. But in Italian, almost every word ends in a vowel. And like I said, it just kind of felt like, it feels weird, like I shouldn't be, I had to retrain literally my mouth to get used to speaking like that. And I'm still learning. I've had to adjust my thinking to understand that that's the way that they speak, right? So this is like how we renew our mind and retrain our thinking to God's ways. It's going to feel weird to you at first. And you're going, that's the way you look at that, God? That's the way you want to do that? God goes, yep. And it's going to feel like this doesn't really feel like I'm used to, all right? But just like me with learning Italian, you have to just retrain yourself. And every day I have my study time, and I hear it, and I hear it, and I try to speak it, and I get a little bit better each time. All right? Now in John 7:24, this is actually the words of Jesus. Remember, we're talking about study the life of Jesus and find out what's important to him and what's not. He says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Now this leads to step 2, because you can read and study all about the way Jesus does things and what the Bible says about the ways of God, but all that is going to be a lot of information unless you, number 2, get yourself out of mind and God in mind. What do I mean by that? Well, Pastor Lori preached this so readily the other day in one of her messages. It was, I forget what the message was titled, but you were talking about when we begin to magnify God in his mercy, in his grace, this sets us free from both self-righteousness and condemnation, okay? Because our carnal brain, or we're talking about the way you see things, it likes to get in one ditch or the other. It really, we like to either look at ourselves and we just see all of our mistakes and, we just get condemned. We're just like, yeah, I got to fix that, and I got to fix that, and that needs to be adjusted, and I'm going to improve there. God, you just must be so disappointed in me. And we get condemned because we're looking at that. We're not seeing our life through the eyes of his grace, okay? Or maybe, because God doesn't want to keep us in our sin and despair, so he wants us to change. So as we start to change, maybe all of a sudden I'm going, oh, you know what? I know God likes that and I got it right today. Hey, look at that. I did that right. And then we start getting a little bit like a little self-righteous, like, oh, well, so-and-so, I did that better than them, or, hey, look, that person doesn't know the truth that I know about this. I've grown up a little bit. We start getting a little bit like, and some of you think, well, I don't know if I've ever felt that before. Well, when was the last time you corrected somebody? When was the last time you told somebody something they were doing wrong? Okay? I'm not saying you shouldn't ever have a confrontation and talk about stuff with people, but it's a little bit of that attitude of self-righteousness where it's like, even if it's like, I don't know, like the way someone does something in the kitchen. I got to watch this for myself too. It's like, why do you wash the dish like that? Why don't you put it in this way? Just wait a second, reel back there. Hang on. It's a little bit of attitude of self-righteousness, Again, you could ask somebody, why do you do it like that? Could we do it like this? What about, but it has to be, I'm going off on a rabbit trail. Lord, reel me back in. Someone needs to hear that apparently. No, maybe it was me. All right. But you got to be careful because that's a little bit of that attitude of self-righteousness and anything. And now, while of course it's good to be repentant of our sin and it's good to feel confident of who God has made us to be, our focus, literally, it has to revolve around God, all right? I heard, you think, well, what do you mean? I heard a good definition of humility once, and that was, humility is not to think poorly about yourself. It's actually not to think much about yourself at all. It's not really to think that I'm doing bad. It's not really to think that I'm doing very good. Let's just think about God. Let's just think about, oh, Lord, you've forgiven me so much. You've blessed me with so much. You're helping me so much. You've strengthened me so much. You forgive me. You love me. When you start to magnify God, you begin to see things the way he does. I felt like the Lord shared something with me for my own personal life one time, because there's that verse, and forgive me that I don't know the reference right now, but it's that as you see him, as you behold him, you become like him. The Lord, I really felt like he shared with me, he said, Laurelle, the more you think about me, the more you look at who I am, the more you see what I do and what I'm like, and just to think about that, the more you'll actually become like that. The more you actually even just think about that and glory in that and thank God for that, the more you're actually going to then have his nature come upon you. It's so cool. It's like when we focus on trying to do everything right, like I gotta try to do this and try to do that, that can backfire. Not saying we shouldn't have diligence and self-control, all right? But it's actually diligence and self-control to think about God. It's the discipline of beholding him. As you see him, you become like him. So again, it's your positioning yourself to think about the glorious wonder and love and majesty of our Heavenly Father. And that's what actually will cause you then to begin to see things the way he sees. And this is shown in Romans 8:5-7. Again, this is Paul writing here. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds, remember that word set their minds on the things of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit, they're setting their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. I'm sorry, that just struck me as so funny. To be carnally minded is death. It's like, oh, all right, I don't want to do that. All right, but to be spiritually minded is what? Life and peace. I want life and peace. My goodness. Now, get this, verse 7, because the carnal mind is enmity against God. For it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can it be. Now this is further confirmed in 1 Corinthians 3:18-19. Let's look at this. Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he catches the wise in their own craftiness. Now, this involves this whole thing, well, I'm wise hold on, God, wait a minute. To be wise, I have to become a fool? Yep. This involves, this is a maybe overly used word, but it has to be said. It involves death to the flesh. All right? It involves crucifying the desire to be approved and acclaimed by men. All right? When you begin to think and do things like God, you will often look like a fool to the world. All right? Now, this is not, I'm not talking about doing things that are rude or mean or not caring and that you're hurting people carelessly. That's not what I'm referring to here. Right? This is when the truth of God that you're living either convicts their own life or they just think you're crazy. All right? They just think it's worthless and futile and without reason, and they just think that you're nuts. But let's look at this in Romans 8:12-14. Paul says, therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. There's that word die again. Flesh, death. Flesh, death. Okay. But if by the Spirit you put to death, there you go. This is the good kind of death right now. If you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. Again, this is backwards. I'm dying to my flesh, and then I'm going to have life? Yeah. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. Oh, this is good. All right. So you're dying to the flesh. God causes you to be born in the Spirit. Wow. You think that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it didn't make sense to Nicodemus either. All right. When Nicodemus came to Jesus, because he was a seeker of truth. He's going, I've heard a lot about Jesus. I think he's the Messiah. He could be the Messiah. I want to go and talk to him. Now, Nicodemus was I believe it was a Pharisee, which means that he had a lot of wisdom. He had been to seminary for a long time. He had a lot of Bible, or in that time it wasn't the Bible, it was the Torah. He had a lot of Torah knowledge. So he went to Jesus and he was asking him some questions. And Jesus says, Nicodemus, you got to be born again. And Nicodemus is like, born again? Oh, I'm a grown man. How? And he even asks, can I actually be physically born again? This is impossible. I won't fit inside my mother. I'm a grown man. And Jesus is like, Jesus says, that which is born of the flesh is flesh. He goes, I'm talking about being born of the Spirit. This is something that you cannot see with your physical eyes. That's why it is the most, salvation is the most supernatural thing ever, because in the Spirit, a person is dead. Then they pray and surrender their life to God, and something happens in their spirit. They become a new person inside. But you can't see it on the outside. They could look the same, but it's inside. It's spiritually discerned. God goes, yep, now I've made them born again. They're a new creature. That's what Paul talks about. They're a new creature in Christ. They've been totally changed. Now, the outside and all of our idiosyncrasies, they take a little time to follow suit. But they do, eventually, as you begin to behold God. That's why salvation is beautiful. It's a supernatural thing. And I had a supernatural experience. Well, I've had multiple. All of you probably have had a supernatural experience, even if you don't know what you have. But I had a dream one time, or I was waking up out of my sleep, and it was like in that state that you're in, where you're not awake and you're not asleep. Probably know what I'm talking about here. Some of you are there right now. No, just kidding. But it hopefully not. Wake up. But I was waking up out of my sleep, and I heard this phrase and I wasn't even thinking about this. So it wasn't like I've been dreaming about this or had read it before, the night before or anything. As I was waking up, I heard this phrase, and it was this scripture. And it said, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. And it just dropped in my, and I knew that, I read that scripture before, but it wasn't like recently. So I went, something's happening here. I'm having a supernatural experience. And it was like, basically all I can say is that I felt like God was implanting that in my spirit. He goes, this is the way you have your vision changed to my vision. This is the movement of my heart for my children, that they are to be led by the Spirit of God, and then they become just like me. They become sons of God. A son is someone who has the nature and characteristic of their parent, all right? How do you become in that nature? The Holy Spirit has to help you, and you are led by the Spirit of God. And that might sound a little bit spooky, like I am led by the Spirit. What does that mean? Like all of a sudden the Spirit's going to take over my body. I'm going to start walking down the street. No. It's where you, this is very simple, where you incline your heart to the Holy Spirit. And then you ask him to direct you. There you go. It's just a surrender. It's a surrender where you're going, Lord, it's not about my agenda. It's not about what I want. I want whatever you want. So just show me. Just show me. I'm willing. I'm willing. That's, I believe, why God chose David. Because David was just like, whatever, God. I'm here for it. If you're here for it, I'm here for it. And this leads me to my final point, all right, is the third. So the first one is to study the life of Jesus. See what in the Bible, get some wisdom, get some knowledge, because if you don't know, you can't know. All right, so get in the Word, read about that, and then just begin to get yourself out of the way, so to speak. Get yourself out of the way and put God in your path. And then third, when you're in that place, ask God for a wise and understanding heart. He likes to be asked about that. God wants to reveal his heart to you. One of the promises in the new covenant is that God would actually, he promised this, he would put his laws on our minds and write them on the tablet of our heart. But our part is to surrender to him, laying aside what we might be inclined to think about him, or even just circumstances or events and other people, and receive his ways with meekness. Now, a story, as I close, that beautifully illustrates this is in the New Testament, in the book of Acts. And it was with a man named Peter. Now, let's look at this together. I should have this for us to read together here. In Acts chapter 10, starting in verse 1, it says, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment. Oh, there we go, the Italian regiment. All right, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household and gave generously to the people, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed to God always. Now, keep in mind, this is a Roman centurion, all right? Like a soldier, like kind of a fierce position, yet he apparently had a very, very surrendered and inclined heart to God. And it says, he prayed to God always. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. And when he observed him, he was afraid and said, what is it, Lord? So he said to him, your prayers, this is the angel now, your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. He will tell you what you must do. And when the angel who spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier from among those who waited on him continually. So when he had explained all these things to them, he sent them to Joppa. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray. about the sixth hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord. I have never eaten anything common or unclean." Now stop there. I want to explain this. Most of you think, what's with the four-footed beasts and creepy, crawly things and what's happening? Why is Peter so aghast? All right, because Peter's a good Jewish boy. He's a good Jewish boy, as were actually all the apostles, if you didn't know that. They were all Jewish. We're following a Jewish man named Jesus. Okay, all right. So Peter's a good Jewish boy. And in the Old Testament, they had very, very strict rules about what things they should eat and what they should not, all right? And there's all reasons for that. It's not a message about that. But this was the old way of doing things. It was, the word today would be kosher or non-kosher, all right? There was like, you don't eat the pigs, you don't eat the shrimp, you don't eat all that because they're the bottom feeders and all this, and you only eat these things. And so God is all of a sudden now showing Peter all this, the shrimp cocktail and the bacon in this big sheet coming down. And God's going, "Have some dinner, Peter." And Peter's like, "Lord, what in the world? I would never do those things." It almost seemed kind of offensive, all right, to his way of thinking that he'd been raised with, all right? He's going, "Not so, Lord. I have never eaten anything common or unclean." That's what he says. And then a voice says to him, the Lord speaking says, and a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." Now this was done 3 times. Obviously, he didn't get it the first time. How many of you are happy that God is willing to do things a couple times for you? All right? Right? And this was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now, while Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, so he still didn't really understand yet, but God knew he would in a second. While he was himself thinking what this meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. And they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. And while Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them." Then he invited them in and lodged with them. And then on the next day, Peter went with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. And the following day they entered Caesarea. Now Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. And as Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshiped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up, I myself am also a man." And he talked with him. He went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, now, and this is when Peter got it. This is when he got it. He said, you know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation, because that was another thing that they did not do. They didn't eat the pork, they didn't eat the shrimp, and they did not go into Gentiles' house. There's all a reason for that. Again, it's not a message for that, but it was more of a separation that needed to take place at that time to keep the remnant of the children of Israel purified so that they could have the race of Jesus come forth through them, all right? But now that was done, God was saying to Peter, well, I'll read what he says. He goes, you know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation who fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. So Peter had some preconceived ideas about what God wanted him to, who God wanted him to minister to. In fact, all the apostles did at that time. They didn't really know that God's salvation had been extended to the Gentiles. Now, pretty much everybody in here is a Gentile, so get a little grateful that this happened because we would be lost without this. Because the Jewish people were like, oh yeah, this is our Jewish Messiah. And God's like, well, yes, I am your Jewish Messiah, but I'm also everybody's Messiah. And I want you to tell that to everybody. But they didn't realize, they thought for guys, hundreds of years, access to Jehovah God had been exclusively to the Jewish race, except a few exceptions here and there. That was not the norm. The norm was you're Jewish and we have the right way. And if you're not of the Jewish race, you're pretty much out. Except for a few maybe exceptions here or there. But so this was a major mental shift that God had to work in all of the disciples. And he used this connection with Cornelius to open up the entire New Testament ministry of the church to all races of people. He had to get Peter to see it, though. He had to get Peter to see that Peter, just like all that, he was using an illustration with that sheet. You think all this stuff is common, it's unclean, it's not worthy, it's not to be used by me. He says, you think it's ordinary, not accepted? He goes, I'm here to say otherwise. Now, how many times do we look at people and write them off? They'll never change. They're always like that. Look at what they just did. I can't see how God would ever work in them. We're calling it common when God looks at them in his mercy and says, I want to make them clean. Look at the Apostle Paul. I mean, he was persecuting Christians before he came to know the Savior Jesus. He was putting them in prison. He was standing in approval of Stephen being stoned to death. The first martyr, Stephen. But Acts records, he was standing there holding the guy's coats going, yep, go for it. Him. I mean, but God looked at Paul and said, I'm going to choose that guy. I'm going to break through to him. It was such a radical transformation in his life that at first, literally, the book of Acts records, the apostles didn't even believe it. They were like, they kind of heard rumors that Paul had a conversion experience, and they were like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to, but by exposing themselves to them, they could all die. I mean, so they were like, this is a little risky, but I love this. It was a good old brother named Barnabas. You know what his name means? It means son of encouragement. I love that. Son of encouragement. Barnabas was the first guy to look at Paul and bring him under his wing and go, I believe you, Paul. I'm going to believe in you. And he showed the other disciples that he was legit. That's the only way that he could be believed. Well, if Barnabas brought him, okay. I mean, it's beautiful to see things the way God does. The world loves winners, not losers. They're called the common. They're called the unclean. They're called the without use. But God doesn't do that. He looks at the little Davids out mowing the lawn when no one invited them to the important dinner. And he says, I'll choose that guy. I think God wants some more men like Barnabas and some more women like Barnabas, those who are going to go, I'm going to look at others and even myself through the eyes of God. I'm going to be so radical that anything that God says, I will believe. I'm going to reprogram my mind to think in God's language, with his value system, no matter how weird or crazy I seem to other people. And I'm going to stop judging by appearances and ask God to help me see his heart on everything. And I want to pray with you today, because this is, again, easier said than done, because we love to judge things by how glamorous they are and how many goosebumps we get about it and what looks to be the most beneficial in our mind, or the most popular, or the most trendy, or whatever. I mean, maybe I'm the only one, but I don't think so. I think we all can fall short of that and in that area. And we all need to have our vision reprogrammed to think this way. And it's very crucial that we do. And I want to pray with you, because if we don't have our vision readjusted, we're going to get off. And someday we're going to be very shocked when we get to heaven of the things we thought were so important, or the things we thought that God was so into that really he wasn't, or the things that he wanted to use, but we didn't recognize it. The story that comes to my mind as I close here is the story of Jacob, when he was literally fleeing his brother's wrath against him for, he had done some deceptive things, Jacob had, and he was basically kind of going, ooh, that wasn't a good choice, and he was running away. And he ended up at a place called Bethel. Well, it wasn't called Bethel at the time, I don't think. He was just, but it was a place, and he was all by himself, and he just kind of was going to go to sleep. And so he took this big rock, just this rock. He just put it down, probably because he didn't have anywhere else to lay down. And he lays down and he goes to sleep. And he has this dream. And in this dream, he sees the heavens open. And he sees like the Bible calls it like a ladder, but that's probably just the way he was able to describe it. It was a supernatural occurrence here where angels were going up and down. They were descending and ascending up and down. And God speaks to him there and calls him and gives him this, like, he goes, he basically was saying, Jacob, I want to have a connection with you here as your God. And you're here, and I want you to be involved together in our relationship. And that was just summing it up here. But then he wakes up, and I love what he says. He wakes up from this dream, and he goes, surely God was in this place, and I did not know it. I want that to sink in, because he didn't realize that little place he was in, on that hard little rock, that he was going to have an encounter with God, and that God was going to reveal himself to him in that very simple place, in that very hard place, in that very unspecial type of place. And he goes, surely God was in this place, and I didn't even know it. How many of us don't even realize that God might want to use something or move in your life in a rather ordinary situation?